Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm continuing my series about the history of the Soviet Union, looking now at the Great Purges. I previously talked about the murder of Sergei Kirov, for which Nikolaev was executed. Nobody disputes that Nikolaev shot dead Kirov, but who put him up to it? Well, after any crime, we have to ask, cui bono? So who gained from this crime? Blatantly, it was Stalin who had the most to gain. He took out a rival, had a stroke. He adeptly created a bogeyman. There was a conspiracy that had to be uprooted and annihilated. So this strengthened his position. Stalin was always deeply suspicious of Leningrad. It was the home of Zinoviev and Kamenev, two of his arch rivals from the mid-1920s. In the 1920s, he'd crushed the anti-party group, as he called them, within the CPSU. And he thought that they still lurked in Leningrad. He was paranoid. He was always seeing plots where there were none. So he dubbed these people the Leningrad opposition. Nikolaev had been arrested a week before the assassination of Kirov for acting suspiciously outside the Smolny Institute. Nikolaev was found in possession of a gun. Amazingly, he was allowed to retain this unlicensed firearm. Almost certainly the secret police put him up to shooting Kirov. Very few people had firearms in the Soviet Union at that time that had been trusted communists. He may have had a personal motive for killing Kirov as well as a political one. Perhaps he felt rancorous about being unemployed. He was a member of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. People have even said that Kirov was having an affair with Nikolaev's wife. That rumor is probably bogus. Anyway, because that female would not have been to his taste. There are other conflicting stories about the assassination. In the 1950s, under Khrushchev, an investigation concluded that Stalin did indeed order that Kirov be slain. The ballet in Leningrad is named after Kirov, and it retains his name to this day. Stalin didn't remove that, because remember, once Kirov was dead, Stalin was saying, oh well, he was a dear disciple of mine. Leningrad reverted to its historic name in 1991. It's St. Petersburg again. There's still a district called Kirov Oblast. And by the way, Kirov wasn't his real name. It was his revolutionary nom de guerre. So let's look at some of the Westerners who were suckered by Stalin. The 1930s was a time of mass unemployment and severe penury in the rest of the world. Because of this hardship, some people thought that the world was on the brink of Marxist revolution. Stalin did. He thought there were all sorts of signals that the capitalist world was teetering on the edge of utter collapse. Unemployed workers from some Occidental countries came in small numbers to the USSR. Most of them were American. They were given jobs in factories and in construction. They lived in tiny, overcrowded flats with several people to a room. People even had to live in corridors. There was little food, and comestibles were meagre. Medical attention was scant and of poor quality. This was not what they had anticipated. This was not the workers' paradise. The USSR organized propaganda tours with aplomb. This from the country that invented the expression Potemkin village. When Catherine the Great in the 18th century wanted to see something rather to impress her lover, Admiral Potemkin, he'd put up all these fake villages, just cardboard things, well, wooden board things. So there were smoke and mirrors tricks going on. Writers and opinion formers found to be sympathetic to the Soviet Union were invited to the country, wined and dined, treated to luxurious tours. They were given the very best of everything. There were, of course, fabulous shows to watch in the ballet and the opera and so on, taken certain things to see things that would make them have their communist beliefs reinforced. George Bernard Shaw is one who fell for this. He was hoodwinked, saying brightly dressed, people danced happily, all was sweet in the Soviet Union. An American socialist wrote of the Soviet Union, I have seen the future, and it works. And they thought that the Soviet success story, as they perceived it, would be replicated throughout the world. Sidney Webb and Beatrice Webb, those British socialists would take it in. They were not communists, they were parliamentary socialists. Indeed, they helped found the London School of Economics and from the Labour Party. So some of these people vehemently denied that there was famine or any malnutrition in the Soviet Union. Well, that couldn't possibly be true because the country was exporting so much food. And there was a bit of cognitive dissonance there for some who did find out what was really going on. Some of the League of Nations Commission found out this. Some of the Norwegian delegates realized what was happening. And then some people managed to run away and tell the truth. Some Soviet citizens went to the United States and said, no, it really is horrific. People are dying in their millions. Communists and socialists didn't want to believe it. Communism and socialism couldn't be entirely disentangled. Democratic socialists felt some connection to communism, even though democratic socialists in the Soviet Union had been viciously repressed by the Communist Party. Western immigrants to the USSR are often found great enthusiasm amongst their co-workers, so it wasn't entirely bleak. Soviet propaganda said that they would build a brighter future, and some people believed that was going to happen. It was just around a corner, a life of plenty and ease, with enough for everyone. The Soviet Union was supposed to be building a fairer society. However, working life in the Soviet Union was very demanding indeed. Many Americans in the USSR began to think the better of having moved there, but their passports had been confiscated and they found it difficult to travel even within the USSR, never mind leaving the country. So how could they go home? So someone managed to sneak to Moscow and wanted to approach the US embassy to request a new passport. The US ambassador to the Soviet Union in the 1930s was Joseph E. Davies, a very prosperous New York lawyer, and he was extraordinarily pro-communist. That didn't stop him living in the lap of luxury. He was a friend of President Roosevelt, and so he was an outspoken admirer of Stalin. He told Americans who begged for a passport they weren't going to have it, and they should ask they weren't going to have one from him, ask the Soviet secret police for your passport back. Well, they were not going to give it back. Torture was carried out in the very same street that the US embassy was located on, and so Davies refused to believe the shrieks he was hearing at night came from torture. They came from a certain building, but these couldn't be emanating because of physical abuse. Davies refused to believe the absolutely irrefutable evidence of famine, mass executions, those cognitive dissonance. He held a certain belief that communism was splendid, then that bumped into incontrovertible evidence. So he said, well, the evidence must be bogus because my belief cannot possibly be a mistake. Other American diplomats knew what was going on, and they were aghast at Davies's complicity in these crimes and him always giving a pass to Stalin. So let's look at Stalin's tastes. People felt free to write letters to Comrade Stalin, and indeed received hundreds of letters every day from ordinary folk from all across the Soviet Union. One of them complained about there being no shower in his workplace. Stalin wrote back that the boss must be informed to install a shower within a week, or he would be tried as an enemy of the people. If you got a warning like that from Stalin, you would move might and main to install that shower. Stalin had a flat in the amusement apartments within the Kremlin. He also had a dacha called Kuntsevo, a few minutes' drive from the Kremlin. Remember, there were almost no cars on the road, the nearer dacha, and he may well have had dachas further west in the Zhukovka area. He took over several Tsarist palaces. He spent summer holidays in Tsarist palaces by the Black Sea. For much of the 1930s, these palaces had no telephone, so letters were delivered by airmail every day. And that's how he kept in touch with his vast empire. It shows you just how primitive technology was throughout the world, that arguably the world's most powerful man didn't have a phone in some of his residences into the 1930s. Remember, telephones were only invented in about 1880. And so ordinary Soviet citizens, they certainly didn't have phones until the 1980s. Stalin always traveled by train since he was dead scared of flying. He liked splendid buildings, but his clothes were very drab and unostentatious. One British visitor described Stalin's office as being like a third-class railway waiting room. When it came to the Second World War, he was going to wear these most spectacular uniforms with a whole chest full of medals, which he didn't earn. So he liked to dine with the top Communist Party officials, members of the Politburo, as in political bureau. These raucous parties lasted all night. He acted as toastmaster. Georgians are into that. Now, the Georgians produce the most fabulous red wine, but they tend to consume vodka in most copious quantities after a Lucullan banquet. They got uproariously drunk. Stalin is said to have actually sipped water and pretended to be drinking vodka because he wanted to see what his men were like when they were inebriated. It said that drunks cannot lie, so he got them all into a crapulous state. They might blurt something out. He'd find out what they really think. They don't know what they're saying when they're blind drunk. If there's any disloyalty in them, it would slip out. One soiree, he asked a senior Air Force commander why warplanes kept crashing in time of peace. And the Air Force commander said Well, they'll continue to crash so long as you send our men up in flying coffins. Oops, really put his foot in his mouth there. Stalin replied gravely, "You shouldn't have said that." A few days later, he was arrested and executed by firing squad. For telling the plain truth? I mean, there's a problem the leader needs to know. Someone with any maturity would welcome admonition, seek to solve problems, and not call you a Trotskyite or something for telling the plain truth. But telling the truth was the most dangerous possible thing. So people had to be capable of doublethink, loudly advocating for something that they knew to be false. Stalin discussed who was going to be purged at home, sent to the gulag or indeed executed. One time, his daughter Svetlana overheard him saying that a certain man was to be purged. This man was the father of Svetlana's friend. She intervened and she beseeched her father to spare this man. Stalin loved his daughter. He didn't have much fondness for his sons. He relented on condition that Svetlana never interfere in such matters again.